He's thinking about it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Empowered Nutrition Podcast. I'm so thrilled to welcome my guest today, Katie Lovitt. She's a registered dietitian. Hi, Katie.
Hey, Erin. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. I can't wait to talk. Katie is aside from being a dietitian, she's an integrative and functional nutrition certified provider. So she's additionally certified and trained in integrative and functional nutrition. And she has an absolutely amazing GI focused practice. And so I really have been loving, I think I found you on Instagram, Katie, and your Instagram is happening. Like you've got it going on there. Good job.
Thank you.
And Katie, you're also a mom of 3. Is that right?
Yes, I am a mom of 3 little girls and a boy.
Yay.
So we share that.
Awesome. Yeah, the mom of 3 life, working with the kids and the GI clients, right?
So good.
Awesome. Well, hey, so I guess the first thing I want to kind of get into is tell me a little bit more about the functional nutrition training, like where you got it and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so I did my functional training through IFNCP, so Integrative and Functional Nutrition Academy, and I absolutely loved it. It was such a great first step into functional nutrition. So I started out, I'd been a dietitian for a while and had always wanted to do functional nutrition, but didn't really even know that that's what it was called. So then I was first introduced to functional medicine and functional nutrition around 2015, excuse me, whenever my oldest daughter was born. As moms, we just care in a whole different way, right? For these little people. So finding a functional practitioner for her and realizing that it was even a thing. And then I took the course from DIFM with the academy and loved it and was like, this is what I wanted to do. And so then I found IFNCP because Sheila and Kathy are, involved with DIFM and the academy.
Yeah.
And got them through that and loved it. And I loved that it touched on a multitude of topics and areas, but it also went deep enough for you to be able to apply what you're learning. Like it's not just a super high level summary. It gave you actual things that you can implement too.
Yeah, I loved it too. I wonder if we did it around the same time because I think I was in maybe the first cohort. It was like 2015, 16.
No, you were before me. So I didn't do it until, Adeline I think I started in October of 2018.
Okay. Yeah.
I waited a little bit. Yeah. I waited a little bit before I started it.
I'm such a fan now. My practice is now a group, and every dietitian that comes in my practice, I'm paying for them to get the
I love that.
What a
gift.
It's a gift to me that they're getting it. So because it really sets us apart in terms of what we can do in terms of maybe talk a little bit to the functional medicine care philosophy in terms of how is that approach different than maybe a traditional healthcare philosophy?
Yeah. So I think that holistic, functional, integrative, it all kind of gets grouped together, and especially people who aren't in the space working may get really confused about what's what. But yeah, so the so integrative and functional, I think, are similar topics. Holistic is kind of out on this end, and conventional is out on this end, right?
Yeah.
I like the spectrums. And then integrative and functional kind of tries to marry the two approaches together. And, we honor and trust and respect conventional medicine and for what it can truly do, because it saves lives every single day. Yeah. But we also recognize that there are flaws to it. It is broken. There are things that need to be done better. And there's new and emerging science that hasn't been implemented like it could be, that could make a really big difference in people's lives. And then we also see this holistic side over here and see that, it's been around for a long time. It does impact people in positive ways. So I think that's the integrative aspect. And then the functional part is really looking at how is the body created and designed to function at its best. And then kind of comparing that to where it is now and, where are the gaps, where are we seeing dysfunction, and recognizing that a disease is a sign of dysfunction. And so whenever you can go in and correct that dysfunction, then you ultimately are able to, resolve or improve the disease or the symptoms that people are experiencing. So.
Yeah. Getting to those root causes of okay, this disease is coming from some underlying thing. And if we just give you a drug that kind of hacks
Mhm.
your biochemistry, that's not addressing that root
Yeah.
dysfunction that,
It's gonna give you
yeah.
relief from your symptoms, but
Mhm.
it's not gonna fix the actual problem, and honestly, I feel like that ends up being a disservice to people because you're not resolving the problem.
Yeah.
So, I always say, symptoms are your body's way of trying to tell you something, and so
Yeah.
whenever it's like a toddler, right? As moms, we know,
Yeah.
it's like if you just are like, "Shh, go away, go away," the kid's not gonna go away, they're just gonna yell louder, get your
Yeah.
attention more boldly, and
Yes.
so our bodies kinda do the same.
Yeah, exactly. Or over time they give up and have ramifications of their like mental
Yeah.
health, maybe is an analogy to it. Your body starts to
Yeah.
degrade if it's not well addressed over time. And
Yeah.
I like too how you touched on like that it is a collaboration. It can exist very beautifully with traditional care models, and that it's not that they're against each other. It's a way of addressing the lacking pieces of that are more on the end of chronic illness, especially, and like it doesn't mean that because it's a different approach that it's not evidence based. I teach a lot about that in like our SIBO training for clinicians is like, look, here's what scope of practice actually means. It means that you're looking at the published evidence, you're incorporating your clinical experience, you're collaborating with peers, and you're combining all of those things into what's your best practice based off of each individual patient. And so when we say, oh, like kind of simplify the idea of evidence-based care to say that needs to be where there's a ton of randomized controlled clinical trials, and then a consensus paper has been written and it's gone into some flow chart that's published in some journal for everybody. That makes healthcare very formulaic, and it kind of like disregards that clinical experience. And then any really evidence that's published, I think it's an average of like 19 years from
Yeah.
when the studies come out to where those,
When it's implemented. Yeah.
yeah. So there's a whole world of evidence-based care that can happen there that might just be, especially in the world of nutrition, safe to do, that is not necessarily so regimented. I think it's like the problem with that type of thinking is like, yeah, with a drug, it is probably important to go through that 19-year
Yeah.
process, but
Mhm.
food isn't the same as a drug. Food is pretty safe to experiment with and trial
Every
things with.
day.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
and nobody's going to fund randomized controlled trials of like asparagus,
No one's
except
gonna
maybe the asparagus people,
Yeah.
but like they're
No
the
one's gonna make
biased.
a lot of money from studying how good asparagus is for you.
Yeah. Well, cool. We think alike. So I got to ask you that. So you're like, you're functional medicine focused, and that sounds pretty different than like earlier in your career. You had like an interesting like background in industry, and it sounds like you worked for Frito-Lay. Is that right?
Yes, I did. It was a really unique experience. So I actually got offered the job right out of college, which when you're graduating college, you're like,
Yeah,
yay.
a
It paid
job.
way better than a clinical position would have paid. And I just saw the opportunity because it's not super common that dietitians are able to work in industry. Most of the time we go to a clinical setting after school. Um, and so just seeing the unique opportunity of getting to be there, and see how, packaged food is made, what goes into making it and marketing it, and, studying what's going to work and not work. And then I actually had kind of two hats. I had a regulatory hat where I was actually labeling the food. So making sure ingredients and nutrition facts were accurate, working with marketing and the legal department on claims to make sure that they were accurate, following the law, not misleading. There wasn't a lot of room for interpretation.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also did a nutrition piece where I was going to nutrition shows and representing Frito-Lay and what they were doing, and the Whole Grains Council. And then I also got to do this really cool project at the end of my time there with school nutrition. It was right when all the school nutrition guidelines were changing.
Yeah.
And so I got to be really heavily involved with, well, what does that mean for the Frito-Lay products that are in schools? Do they meet the regulations? And there's actually kind of a side note. I had a little triumph of the way the regulations were written. It said all the grains had to be whole grain with the balance of the grains enriched. And in order to enrich a grain, it has to meet a standard of identity. And so any like corn masa based products, including, tortillas or corn chips or anything like that, it's impossible from the manufacturing process for them to be 100% whole grain, because you can't process the masa. But there's no standard of identity for enrichment of corn masa either. And so you couldn't have corn products in schools, which, but challenge, for these schools and these school dietitians, gosh, they're already up against a huge challenge to make the formula work. But so we actually were able to get the regulations to where they made more sense for all foods, instead of, this like regulation that didn't make sense for the certain group of foods.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Cool project.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty interesting shift you made from working in industry to having your own private functional nutrition practice. Can you share a little bit more about you went from one end of the spectrum to the other. How did that come about?
Yeah. So when I went to school, and we were talking about this before we started recording, so I know that you kind of had a similar experience, like we were talking before about integrative nutrition, things take a really long time to get implemented. And so I found that the things I was being taught in college were very outdated and honestly pretty disappointing. I went to nutrition school to learn how to use food to help people feel better and healthier and live fuller lives. And that wasn't really what I learned. I learned very clinical, like how to calculate tube feedings, how to hand out, an outdated handout on what a heart healthy diet meant. And 10 minutes in the room in a hospital with someone who's just been cut open, major bypass surgery, hand them a handout, and then you leave and they have no ongoing support. And I just saw that and thought, I can't make a difference doing it. That's not what I wanted to do. And so then I got faced with this other opportunity with Frito-Lay. And I thought, if I can make sure that food that people are eating is properly labeled and accurately labeled and makes sense, I can impact people's lives in a good way from there. And it was a cool experience. Whenever I had my first daughter, I did not want to go back to corporate world. It was just not my vibe. My dad's an entrepreneur, so I'm not a corporate kind of girl.
That's funny. Mine is too. Maybe it's
really. It's in the blood. So got to go home and just stay home with her, and honestly took a break from nutrition. I didn't see myself going back to doing nutrition work ever, just based on what I'd learned in college and then my experience working. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I did some stuff in men's fashion for a little bit. Which was super fun and creative. And then I stumbled upon functional and integrative medicine, actually with my oldest daughter's pediatrician. Was that we had been going to the pediatrician. She'd been struggling with some health issues. I didn't feel like her needs were met. And I got this introduction to this awesome integrative pediatrician in our area. And he's a medical doctor, but also saw him applying some homeopathic, approaches and integrative and functional. And I was like, wow, there's a space for this. And then I fell across DIFM, which is Dietitians in Integrative and Functional Nutrition, which is part of the Academy of Nutrition. It's like a subgroup. And I took their course and I was like, oh, this exists. This is what I wanted to learn in college. This is what I want to do. So it's cool that, how you're led in a certain path, because I'm not sure I would have ever found it if I hadn't had the experiences from the past. So.
Yeah. How often is that where it sounds like you had a personal experience with your daughter, and that kind of can kick it off sometimes, where you feel like you've had an awakening that maybe the overarching bubble of healthcare isn't as perfect or effective as you thought when you have a chronic problem.
Yeah. We also had, my dad had prostate cancer. My sister actually passed away suddenly, and no one was ever able to explain why or what happened. And then I had to have a pacemaker replaced after.
Oh my gosh.
Which now looking back, I'm like, that was a stress response to my sister passing away, and I know that now. But at the time, people couldn't explain why that was happening. There weren't really any permanent real solutions or fixes. It was just like, well, it is what it is. We just manage it and move forward. And you just feel in your gut like it's not right, it's not right. And sends you on a quest for more information and deeper answers.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's no like clinical flow chart for grief.
No, there sure isn't. And just the stress and the mind-body connection, like it's just not honored, I don't think, a lot of the time enough. And yeah, it has a real impact. So I love that about integrative nutrition and functional nutrition is it takes that into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, even though it's a tragedy what you went through, I find that people that have a story like that have like the most passion for their work and tend to be where they change so many lives. And GI is especially, I find, like, as now somebody who like teaches other dietitians GI too and works in GI, it's such an area where like you really do have to have a passion for it to be effective, I think, because it really does take so much deep study and focus. And so I'm curious, like, how did you end up in GI? And like, you're actually focused on just women. So like, why GI and why women exclusively?
Yeah. So I think, like you said, like I want to have a deep impact on people. And so going through IFNA, the functional nutrition credentialing program we both did, I really loved everything that I learned about. But I saw the one that seemed to be, I don't want to say a catch-all, but the one that was connected to everything else was the gut. And it just was so resounding, like the gut. And I found that whenever you have gut issues, whether you have gut symptoms or not, if there's a functional issue in the gut, it can cause all kinds of problems. And likewise, whenever those gut issues are rebalanced and resolved, a whole host of issues are also resolved alongside it. So I love working in gut health because it can have such a bigger impact than just on that one system, truly lead to complete transformation from, just the gut health outwards to the person where they're transformed in how they show.
That's actually how I got into it also. It's interesting because the classic thing is like I had really bad digestive issues and that's how I got into it. But for me, it's like, this is the hub of health right here. And it's messed up in most people. So you can powerfully change people's lives and their health in like a myriad of ways. Their mental health, their hormonal health, their metabolic health, their digestive health, all of it is connected to the gut. And so like, how could you focus on anything else is almost how I think about it.
I feel like if you're like, even if you're in hormones or in weight loss or, any other area where dietitians tend to focus, I'm like, but you have to do the gut first. You have to help the gut first because otherwise you're not fixing the true issue. And, likewise, I think the gut is kind of like a big wrecking ball that goes down to tear down a building. Like when you heal the gut, it's like the big wrecking ball. And then maybe if you, afterwards you have like a few bricks standing that you can go start to take apart by hand. But most of the work is done by healing that gut. So, and you had asked about why I focus on women specifically. I do help men as well. So if there are any men listening who need help, I can help you.
You're invited.
You are invited. I do talk mostly to women because I think it's 70%. I told you beforehand, I'm not a statistic person. Look at me trying to throw out numbers.
It is majority women with digestive.
Of women, of the IBS people or people with gut health issues and symptoms are women. So I think, it makes sense to talk to them because we're not talking about it with each other. I haven't met a single woman. I'm sure there's some out there, and it gets to a point where people just don't care. And it's such a big part of their life. They're like, I just say it all.
Talking about my poop.
Hide it. But for the most part, like it's this like shame or embarrassment, and people don't talk about their gut symptoms, and so it can feel very isolating. So awareness to that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love too how you talked about how gut health is connected to so many things that it can be people. This is like something that I have to talk to people. It's a hard discussion sometimes with my clients. Is like, if you don't have any digestive symptoms, your problems probably still lie, at least in part, in the gut. And so I know today we want to talk about like weight and metabolism and kind of focus in on how is the gut connected to that. And I know for sure in my gut focus practice, I get a lot of people who do have digestive problems and they have metabolic problems. So it could be that they have problems with their weight, but it also could be like insulin resistance, cholesterol problems, blood pressure problems, and that whole axis of sort of like metabolic syndrome. And I'm kind of curious if you're seeing those two things together a lot as well.
Yes, absolutely. I would very much agree with that whenever somebody comes to me with gut issues, 8 to 9 times out of 10, they also have weight issues going on, or other, even if they aren't overweight, maybe they have insulin resistance, like you said, or maybe they have high blood pressure or high cholesterol or something like that. Like, we see these collections of symptoms and diseases, right? It's very rarely they have just one thing when they come to us with gut symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. So I really want to get into with you today some of like the mechanisms for that, of like how does that connection exist? And so I know, like, maybe you can just kind of get into that in terms of like, talk to me about like diet quality and how that affects the gut, and then in turn, like how that can kind of affect like our metabolic health.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have this understanding. I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because when people have a better understanding of the why, they're more motivated to take action on it, right? And versus just this like vague, oh, it could be, linked to this,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's hard to apply it. So I love that we're talking about it. But yeah, so different, and I talk about it a little bit with my kids too. So I'm going to frame it almost like I talk to them, because it breaks it down in a really easy, I think, way to understand. So we have tummy bugs, right, that are mostly in our large intestine, and different types. We have a whole bunch of different kinds, and different types of tummy bugs eat different foods. And so whenever you're eating a certain type of food, a certain type of microorganism is, able to eat it and break it down, and others are not. And so what we see, and what science has actually shown us, this has actually been studied. Like, this isn't just me and Erin saying like, "Oh, we noticed this like correlation through our work." Like, this has been heavily studied for like decades, I think. Like, it's newer and it hasn't been fully implemented, but there are a lot of studies. So if you like science, you can go into PubMed and find the studies. But we know that we have, different bacteria that are able to break down starches faster and more slowly. And that impacts our ability to absorb those starches or not absorb the starches and have them pass through. And so, it's really important to understand, what is your microbiome made up of? Like, what are the organisms living in there?
Yeah.
What are they feeding on? Like, are they breaking down starches really fast, really slow? Are they making short chain fatty acids, which help to reduce inflammation and calm everything down in the gut? Are you taking a probiotic that is giving you more of these microorganisms that you really don't need, that are contributing to the problem?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the most eye-opening moments I have with my clients, it's like we'll be looking at a functional stool test, and I'll see, for example, like they have like too many Firmicutes, which is like a phyla of bacteria, as compared to a phyla called Bacteroidetes, which is like a more healthy phyla. Or maybe they have just an overall abundance or an overgrowth of bacteria that looks like it could potentially be SIBO. And if their client who does have these metabolic problems, I'll say, like, look, your gut looks like a gut that might actually be harvesting more calories out of the same food that somebody else might eat. And that could be part of what's happening here. And I see a lot, especially with like SIBO, where there's like too much bacteria, too much starch breakdown. It's happening faster, where like their metabolism seemed fine. And then when they got their SIBO, they started gaining weight rapidly. And I tell them, it's part of that. You're like, you got like a super energy harvesting system going on in your gut with all this extra bacteria.
Yeah. So, and I think I don't know if your audience needs us to break that down a little bit more clearly and like connect those dots. But so you have these microorganisms, most of them are in your large intestine. When you have something called SIBO, they move up into your small intestine.
Yeah.
And if you think about the pathway that your food has through your digestive tract, it becomes less digested to more digested at the end, right? And so all these bugs, just like a human, I guess, have a certain capacity to break food down. And so like what you were saying, Erin, where if you have an overgrowth or an overabundance of all bacteria or certain types of bacteria that are really good at breaking food down really quickly, especially in the small intestine, which is where we absorb nutrients, those nutrients are more available for us to absorb, and then they're now in our body. Versus if our microbiome is more imbalanced and we have fewer of those Firmicutes and more Bacteroidetes, and the food is passing through our GI tract largely more undigested and we're, eliminating more waste, it's going to lead you to not gain as much weight, not absorb as much starch and nutrients. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. We totally agree on that. And like to your point too, I think the classic thing I see just like you is, let me take a probiotic. And then you could just be adding more fuel to the fire with that because
It's so confusing. Like I remember when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I hadn't done any functional training yet. And I was like, my doctor said I need to be on a probiotic. So I went down to Whole Foods and I saw a helper dude there and I was like, I need a probiotic. He's like, yeah, you do. You're pregnant. Here's a good one. And I was like, okay, great. Thanks. I was like, I don't know what to get. I don't know what all these numbers mean. I think more is generally better. You want more different types and more numbers, and that's great. But like there's so much more nuance to it. And so you really want to pick one. There's a large variety of probiotics because there's a large variety of needs.
Exactly. And that's a huge part of, I think, our expertise is like, I'm not just like, hey, here's the probiotic I give everybody. It's very nuanced with their situation in terms of the product, the dose, the timing, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And some people don't tolerate certain types of probiotics very well. Like some people actually notice an increase of symptoms whenever they take them. So it's always important to look at, what's going on in the gut, but also take the person into mind too. And I think that's another aspect of what we do with functional nutrition is, we're not just looking at the person as they're on a piece of paper, like we're actually considering how they are as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, I love how you also brought up inflammation. Like I have a whole course and membership around metabolic health, and like 2 out of the 4 modules are about inflammation. And a lot of times people are like, why I'm here to lose weight. Why are we talking about inflammation? So maybe connect those dots for me a little bit. And especially, I know you mentioned short chain fatty acids, but maybe you can flesh that out a little bit more in terms of like, what are those and like, how do they relate to inflammation?
Yeah. And you feel free to jump in on all of this too. I love that you include it in your metabolism course. That's awesome. So needed. So needed, you guys, whether you realize it or not.
Surprise.
We were talking. I feel like I do that with my clients with mindset too. Like they start working with me and I'm like, so let's talk about your mindset. Look at my blood. So we were talking about how different bacteria break down food, right? As they pass through our system. Well, they don't just they have waste too. Just like we have waste that we eliminate, bacteria have waste too. And that is gas, but it's also nutrients that we as the host need. And one of those is short chain fatty acids. And they are what it sounds like. They're fatty acids that are short, but they actually help to reduce inflammation. And I see almost all of my clients who come to me with gut symptoms, whenever we do a stool test on them, their short chain fatty acids are low. Whether it's typically it's their overall short chain fatty acids and then maybe one of the ones that's measured too. So there's different types of short chain fatty acids. But they're anti-inflammatory. They help maintain the integrity of our gut lining and keep it happy and functional, which the gut lining is the barrier, right? Think about it as your skin in your gut. The skin on your outside of your body keeps things from getting in that aren't supposed to be getting in. And the lining of your gut does the same. It helps, kind of escort the nutrients into our body and helps them get to where they need to be. And then anything that is a toxin or, waste or something that our body doesn't need, something that's not broken down the right way, it keeps it out. And so whenever our short chain fatty acids are low, that lining of the gut is not able to, it doesn't have the nutrients it needs to do what it needs to do. So it's really, really important to manage. And whenever you don't have that integrity in the gut lining, what is it? 2/3 of the immune system is in the gut.
Yeah.
And so that starts to get angry and exposed. And then you start to have all these other issues that come with inflammation. So your gut gets inflamed and that inflammation spreads throughout your whole body. And it can present in a lot of different ways, like we were saying earlier, but it all is a lot of the time due to this gut issue. So some of the ways are autoimmune conditions, heart disease, insulin resistance, or in this conversation, this weight increase. which is an inflammatory response a lot of the time.
Yep. Yeah. It's so good, Katie. Exactly. The way I explain it sometimes is like, look, your gut is like a huge surface area in your body that if the lining is broken down, it's like a huge wound. And just the way if you have a wound on your arm and you see it red and it's swollen and it's hot, it's inflamed.
Yeah.
That's happening if your gut wall's broken down. And again, the connection here is you need the right microbes and the right fibers in order to produce the short chain fatty acids that support that gut lining, that keep that gut lining healthy. And otherwise it does become where it's inflamed like that and broken down. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about the other side of the coin, because we know we want our healthy gut bacteria to produce short chain fatty acids. That's part of what makes them healthy gut bacteria. And then we have these sort of like unhealthy gut bacteria, and what are the things that they produce, and how does that connect to inflammation?
Yeah. So there's, everything is balance, right? Like I love functional nutrition because so much of it is about balance. And I am not a black and white person typically. And this lets you look at it all in relationship to everything else. So like, yes, generally there are some things that are bad. So there's pathogens, right? The bad bacteria that make us very, very sick. But then we have a whole huge amount of microbes that are normal to be in our gut. But some of them are what we call in this space opportunistic. And that is, they are okay, but under the right circumstances, they can overpopulate and overgrow very, very quickly. And they overcrowd those good organisms that we were talking about that make the short chain fatty acids and other nutrients for us. They can overcrowd them and keep them from growing. But then these other opportunistic organisms can also cause damage in and of themselves whenever they're overgrowing. And I think, are you wanting to talk about the LPS now, Erin? You want me
to let's talk about it.
Wow.
Yeah, let's go there.
Let's talk about it. So a lot of the time, these organisms in their cell wall, so like go back in your brain to 9th grade biology, right? And they all have this cell wall, which is kind of like their skin. It holds them together. And some types of bacteria, so our gram-negative bacteria, have in their cell wall this lipopolysaccharide. And what happens is it can be released whenever the cells die off, whenever they become damaged. And those are pro-inflammatory to, and like directly damaging to that gut lining that we were talking about. What else do you want to add to that, Erin?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the research, I'm in this doctorate program, and we did this whole like class on metabolism lately, and I had no idea how much research there's actually been on LPS. There's a ton actually, where like they literally will measure this. How much are these? Basically, it's like, if you think about the bad bacteria, they have a turnover. So when they die, their little cell wall parts come through your intestinal permeability, and then because because
you don't have fatty acids.
Yes, yes, the vicious cycle is happening. Yep, and then it's like an influx of these pro-inflammatory things that are immunogenic. So it kind of puts your immune system in overdrive, especially because, to your point, we have so much of our immune system in our gut. So it's really just like freaks it out when those LPS pieces come through and cause the systemic inflammation that they've actually found in these clinical trials over and over again, where there's like a statistical significance in terms of like the more LPS in a stepwise fashion, the more LPS you have, the more likely you are to be overweight, the more likely you are to have diabetes and to have problems with your cholesterol, because they all have this underpinning and inflammation that these LPS are driven by the unhealthy bacteria are causing. And so I think that's just like such a like mind-blowing thing for people, and almost like validating when I explain this to my groups, especially like weight loss groups, of people who their whole lives have kind of felt like, okay, like other people can eat in a way that I can't eat. Like what's different about me that I can't eat that way, and I gain a lot of weight and my friend doesn't gain a lot of weight when we eat the same way. A lot of it is this metabolic endotoxemia piece in their gut health. And that could be such just like a validating thing for people especially when we like then do their gut test and we see like, yep, sure enough, you do have this dysbiosis that matches that. Let's work on it,
Yeah. And I think, for a while it was all blamed on genetics, right?
Yeah. Or
Like,
just like maybe you're actually lying and you're pigging out every night.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it's, so good to just kind of like I was saying earlier, like you know in your gut that there's a reason, that there's like you're
I
doing
see
the
what you did
thing
there.
you're working on it. Uh, Pun intended. You know that there's a reason that you aren't able to eat as much as your friends or family are able to eat without gaining weight. And there's a reason that you feel like, you've been doing the things and not seeing progress. You've cut your
Yeah.
calories, you've increased your exercise, and you're like still gaining weight.
Mhm.
And so for somebody to see that, and I love how beautifully you played it out and put it out there, because when you have leaky gut, those LPSs, those little toxins, are literally going from your gut
Yeah.
into your bloodstream.
Yeah.
And think about the circulatory system. It's literally all over your body. So these
Everywhere.
toxins are now literally being pumped to every single cell in your body as part of
Yeah.
your blood. And there is a testable direct link between gut health and weight issues. And I love how you explain.
Yeah. I feel like people have not been told enough about this LPS. It's called metabolic endotoxemia, that's a mouthful. But when you have that inflammatory state, what do you do, Katie? Obviously, we kind of said you can't just truck yourself down to Costco or Walmart or Target and buy probiotics. So what's your typical approach with a situation like this where maybe you have the low short chain fatty acids, you also have the high LPS producers, you've got the metabolic problems. What's kind of your flow with how you address that?
Yeah. So you need to be tested, which if you already know that you have this, you may have already been tested. And I use the Vibrant America Gut Zoomer stool
Mhm.
test for my testing. So it's a functional stool test. I think it's the most comprehensive one available. It shares the most information, and it really helps us to see where is your microbiome, how
Mhm.
inflamed are you, what bugs are growing, what bugs are not growing, how well are you digesting your food. It's like magic school busing yourself inside of your gut, I always say.
Yeah.
Next best thing. And then, we start, and I have, my own framework and approach that I use with my clients, and it's very personalized. I alluded to this before, but I do a lot of work with mindset. And if you're somebody who's been struggling with weight your whole life, there's probably a really big need for some mindset work. And that's because we are body, mind, and spirit. So if we're trying to make these changes to your body, but your mind doesn't believe that it's possible, or that you're good enough to deserve it, or any of the other head trash that you've given yourself over the years, you're not going to see results and you're not going to be successful. So we have to bring that mindset piece into it. First and foremost, foundationally. And then, we make the shifts. We look at, okay, what are you eating right now? What do you want to eat? What is your lifestyle? What do you want? What are your goals? Because what my goals would be for myself may not be what you would want, And so I think that's another thing that functional nutrition does, is we look at you as a unique individual with unique wants and desires and needs. Because if I tell you, to get optimal gut health, you have to follow this certain diet, and you may or may not ever be able to get off of it, and you're not willing to do that, it's not worth it to you, then that's silly of me to say, this is the only way to see results and improvement.
Yeah.
Is to do this, because that's not helping you at all.
Right.
So we look at nutrition, we look at hydration, we also look at sleep and rest, stress levels, exercise and movement, physical activity, and environmental toxins. Because if you already have metabolic endotoxemia and you already have this toxic burden from your microbiome, we want to make sure that we're managing other environmental toxins where it makes sense too as well, so that we're just reducing the overall burden on your body.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
What about, I do all the same, even the same test, but tell me a little bit more about supplements in terms of are you doing things herbal wise to rebalance the gut? How do you play there?
Yeah, sometimes. It depends. It's all so personalized. Erin, you are too. Like, we're not going to just give someone a probiotic. Like we said before, like you said before, Erin, like everything with conventional medicine is so formulaic and flowcharty. That's just not how it is in the real world. It's just not. And so we're looking at what pre-existing conditions do you have going on? Do you have an autoimmune condition? Do you have, other things? Are you on medications, that you need to take? How willing are you to take supplements? How much money do you have, to spend on supplements each month? All of that. But yeah, typically, so if there's an overgrowth, we need to help reduce that, right? So we can do some herbal supplements to help with that. If that gut lining is damaged, like we mentioned, there are definitely, some supplements that we can do to help with that. Whether it's L-glutamine or zinc or, I find that people tend to be pretty sensitive a lot of the time when they come to me and have a lot of issues going on. So I oftentimes like to opt more for single ingredient supplements than like throwing the whole kitchen sink at somebody, because sometimes it might just be too much, So I always like to start a little bit slow. And I may or may not do a probiotic at first. If we have an overgrowth or we're doing a bunch of other things first, we may wait to do the probiotic until later so that you're either not overwhelmed. I think the jury is basically still out on if you're doing to add a probiotic during SIBO treatment or overgrowth treatment or after. I think there's a lot of debate on when to add the probiotic, but yeah.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, actually it's nice to have an intern watching right now, and I always think like, God, I always kill my interns because every single client gets a different protocol.
We all get a different one.
But there is a logic to it. But to your point, there's so many factors that come into play, and not just clinical factors, but lifestyle, financial factors, preferences that really drive your decisions around what's the protocol that's going to be optimal to combine with the diet and the lifestyle interventions, like you said. So yeah, we think alike.
Yeah, I love it.
Awesome. Well, Katie, you're so amazing. And I can tell that you have a great way of working with people in the sense that you're obviously brilliant with the science, and you've also got such a great, like, relatable personality where I can tell you really connect with your clients. And I definitely checked you out at nourishthriveWellness.com. And so I know that obviously people can check you out there, but maybe tell me a little bit about, I saw like a bunch of different free resources on there. What are kind of some things that people should check out on your website?
Yeah. So nourishthriveWellness.com is my website. And I do have a blog that we post new blog posts about once a month. You can sign up for my once a week newsletter there. And then I also have a free training. So it's like 2 for the price of 1. You sign up once and you get 2 things. So the first one is a video training that I've done all about digestion, digestive enzymes. There's a lot of questions about digestive enzymes. Yeah. And I don't know if you found this, Erin. I get from people so many times whenever we first start working together, and they're like, oh my word, you told me like all these things. I've been like implementing, the goals that we set out to do. And you want to hear the thing that made the biggest difference is chewing my food. And so I made it in my free resources, like my best tips on boosting digestion, because oftentimes people find that that's all they need and their gut symptoms resolve. So it's totally free. Go check it out. And then I have a downloadable symptom and food journal tracker with a page to help you look for patterns, because I think that's what's missing on elimination diets and symptom trackers and all of that is like, I have all this information. Like, how in the world am I supposed to figure anything out from it? So it actually walks you through step by step how to look at it like I look at it with my clients. So go check that out.
Love that. It's like a little free peek inside your brain. That's so exciting.
Yes.
I want to go do it and see what you would tell me to do. Awesome. All right, Katie. Well, that's super cool. I know that people will love checking those out. And then I also thought they want to work with you, they reach out and schedule a free call with you on the website as well.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Perfect. Would love to talk with you guys some more.
Awesome, you guys. Check her out. Schedule a free call to chat with her. And Katie, it's been such a joy. Thank you so much for coming on the Empower Nutrition podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Erin.
We'll have to do round 2. I had like 6 ideas while we talked.
Yes,
So
yes, let's talk.
see you next
Would
time.
love it. Perfect. Thanks, Erin. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.